Okay, I think that's everybody. So we'll make a start. So yeah, welcome to today's 2022 Energy Policy and Strategy webinar. We're joined by Rebecca Beresford, Net Zero Strategy and Policy Director, and her manager within Rebecca's team, Roy Collins. So today Rebecca's going to take a look back at 2022 with a bit of an overview, and then give us some insight into what we might expect to see in 2023, including nuclear, renewables, energy market crisis, and much more. So I'll just start with a bit of housekeeping. So today's webinar is being recorded so that we can share this with you after, or with anybody that wants to watch back on demand. If you've got any questions throughout, please pop them into the Q&A function, and after Rebecca's finished her presentation, Roy will join her and we'll run through a bit of a Q&A at the end. Any questions that we can't answer today, we'll share our contact details so you can get in touch and we can hopefully pick these up with you offline. So yeah, I think that's it on the housekeeping. I'll hand over to Rebecca. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Penny, can you hear me?
I can hear you fine, Rebecca.
Thank you, Roy. Thank you. I'm sorry. I'm just trying to sort out my own screen view now to make sure I'm actually looking at you rather than
sorry, Rebecca, I was on mute as well.
No problem
loud
at
and
all,
clear.
Penny.
Thank you.
No, good. Thank you. Thanks very much for the introduction, and thank you for inviting me to join the session today. I'm really delighted to see how many people were interested in this topic, which obviously is very close to our heart and our day jobs. So as Penny said, we will talk a bit about the very unusual year we've had in the energy markets this year. It's been a bit of a roller coaster ride as a large generator and supplier this year for us, as I know it has been for customers too. We'll do a bit of a zoom in on some of the shorter term crisis related interventions, and then we will attempt to step back from the short term response to look at the strategic priorities that continue to be important despite the energy crisis and the inevitable and highly necessary reactive interventions we've seen there. Slightly wary because at the end we will attempt to have a look forward to what will happen in 2023 in the world of energy. And in preparation for this session, we had a look at what was discussed this time last year as what might happen in 2022 in the world of energy and energy policy. And I think nobody would be surprised to know that relatively little of what we said this time last year was going to happen in 2022 has in fact played out. So please take all of our predictions about 2023 with an appropriate pinch of salt. All right, Penny, if we can have that first slide, please. Thank you. So the first thing to say is that we knew over a year ago that energy prices were rising, and we were very concerned then about affordability of bills for customers, for domestic customers and non-domestic customers. This time last year, that was a key topic of focus for me and my team and in our conversations with policymakers. Obviously, as we all know, we went into the start of this year and very quickly we had Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and that has certainly made what we were already seeing in terms of energy prices and energy price rises a good deal worse, with the geopolitical situation really driving concerns not just about price but also about security of supply and whether there would be adequate gas and therefore electricity supplies, which obviously has a knock-on impact on prices. And so in the UK as well as elsewhere, it's increased the focus on energy independence, I suppose, with domestically produced and, as far as possible, low carbon energy being at the centre of the longer term response to this situation, although clearly not an immediate fix. And inevitably, where there are increased consumer prices, there's also been concern about who might be benefiting, whether or not there might be windfall profits in some other parts of the sector. And we've seen action there initially for the oil and gas sector, and then more recently conversations around electricity generation in the UK, which we'll talk a little bit more about. And overall, there's been a very wide range, diverse set of interventions that has kept policymakers very busy and has been a very intense period of work across the industry. So I'm going to start, as I said, well, in fact, we will start by just a reminder of what I'm sure everyone is quite familiar with in terms of what power prices have looked like historically and more recently. So there are many ways you could plot this kind of picture. This particular cut that we've taken is monthly averages of day-ahead power prices. So it goes on the x-axis, it goes all the way back to 2010, because we really wanted to illustrate that there has been a long-term, well, we got used to levels that fluctuated broadly around about £50 a megawatt hour for electricity. And I would say broadly, because at the time when you're in there, it certainly didn't feel as though it was always 50. So you can see there are peaks and troughs on that line, but by the time you get to late 2021, anything that had happened before in that preceding 10 years is blown out of the water by quite how starkly prices shot up and then have been very volatile as well. And being a monthly average of day-ahead prices, this chart disguises the fact that individual days themselves would have been much higher and lower. And also this is only day-ahead power prices. There are many other products where you might be buying the season ahead or year ahead or next year's power, where you would have seen similar patterns playing out in terms of volatility and price rises. And this has made it extremely difficult for suppliers and for customers to make decisions about when to purchase energy, and has also exposed all participants to very considerable risks in doing so. The next part, which we won't dwell on, is the equivalent picture for gas. So we all know that the gas price is a key driver behind those electricity prices. And again, you can see the long-term picture, which appears very stable when you look at it now, in contrast with where prices have been for the last year and a little bit. So how has the government responded to this situation? I think, firstly, I would say that the domestic political situation that we had in the UK, particularly through the summer with the Conservative leadership process. Penny, if you could move on to the next slide, thank you. The Conservative leadership contest that we saw through the summer had a genuine impact in how and when the government actually was in a position to make big decisions that were needed in this space. It was not, we were talking to government about the need to support customers with energy bills, both business customers and domestic customers, from very much earlier this year, or even the end of last year. But it was not until late August or early September that really the government could start, the civil service could start in earnest once they had a prime minister in place. So this chart shows for domestic customers, I think quite familiar picture of where the Ofgem set price cap had been since 2020. So it's a simplification to say it was a little bit over £1,000 a year, but compared to where we are now, that's an appropriate simplification. And in the summer, so from April, the domestic price cap stepped very significantly to just under £2,000 a year. And without any form of intervention, it would have stepped up to around £3,500 a year from October. And indeed, Ofgem got to the stage of announcing that that would be the price cap for the winter period, before very quickly, within a matter of days, the government coming out and announcing the new energy price guarantee level, which further caps the level of the Ofgem price cap at a level that meant that a typical customer with an average demand, we'll have a debate about whether such customers truly exist, but for a typical customer, the energy price guarantee would mean a dual fuel bill of £2,500 a year, which is a very substantial discount from the approximately £3,500 a year that would otherwise have been charged to customers this winter. And that difference is being funded directly by Treasury and therefore by taxpayers. So energy consumers are paying a price that is significantly below cost, and energy suppliers are being kept whole with an additional payment from Treasury. There are also other targeted support measures for vulnerable consumers, for pensioners, and for customers who are disabled, overall leading to an extremely expensive but necessary package of support for customers that are in place at the moment. And moving on to non-domestic customers, again, we saw an unprecedented level of direct support provided for non-domestic energy customers. Again, similar to the domestic scheme, taking the form of a pence per kilowatt hour discount, pence per kilowatt hour discount, with the difference being refunded to energy suppliers directly from the Treasury. So the Energy Bill Relief Scheme, which is the name for the non-domestic scheme, is implemented differently for different customers depending on how customers have contracted for their energy supply, whether it's a fixed tariff or a flexible tariff or a deemed or extended supply tariff. It has made it quite complicated, both for energy suppliers to implement, but also for us to try and explain to our customers. So the best source of information to try and keep everything up to date is on EDF's website. You can see the link on the screen there. Nevertheless, the scheme is now up and running, and hopefully running successfully for us as well as for our customers. But no sooner are we in that position than the government is reviewing how it will operate after April. There's a formal review happening at the moment, and the expectation is that support for customers, for non-domestic customers, will be very much more targeted and only available to limited customers after April. We're participating in that conversation with government, but it's too early to say quite how that will land. I honestly am not sure where it will get to. What we do know is that as you can see on the slide there, certainly the expectation is that the budget for any support coming from government will be very much lower, and there will need to be a very high bar that needs to be passed for businesses to continue to receive some support. So that is a work in progress, and we're continuing to talk to the government about how energy suppliers can participate in that process. So in other short-term energy crisis response interventions, I mentioned security of supply at the start. So it's the role of the national electricity and system operator and the gas system operator to monitor the levels of expected demand and supply, and to produce the forecasts that are used by the government to understand whether or not there is a shortage. And first thing, very important to say that in the central scenario, the best view of the experts responsible for producing these forecasts is that there will not be gas or electricity shortages this winter. Nevertheless, the system is sufficiently tight, and the risks, including the geopolitical risks that I mentioned, are significantly big enough that steps have been taken to really to act on security supply to give extra margins of comfort. One of those areas that has been acted on is that there are 2 coal stations, one of which happens to be owned by EDF, and the other is Drax, which have agreed to keep our stations available and open for longer than we had otherwise planned. We were intending to shut our coal station earlier this year, so that they're available on standby in case they are needed, which would particularly be in the case perhaps of a gas shortage and interruption to gas supply. that prevented gas power stations from being able to run as expected. I think it's important to say that the station is not running, certainly not running beyond a sort of testing regime. It is there and it is available as an insurance as a backup. And you might also have heard about the demand flexibility service that the electricity system operator has introduced, hopefully giving access to additional flexibility from customers, from business customers and some domestic customers, to help balance national electricity demand when it's at its highest. I'm personally really excited to have seen this scheme come forwards this year. Although it is very much at trial stage, it is certainly something that we expected would be needed and would be part of a decarbonised energy system in future. And the fact that the current circumstances are such that this has happened this year, I think is something to be welcomed, and it will be really interesting to see how the results of that look. Centrica has also partially reopened one of its gas storage facilities. The UK still has relatively low levels of gas storage, and it's not clear that we're in any position to material difference to our gas security supply through gas storage in the short term, but nevertheless that has happened. And as we will all have experienced ourselves, the mild weather that we've seen so far this winter has helped. Of course, it's very hard to know what might happen in the next few weeks. There are rumours of a cold snap that I have seen, but certainly so far the mild weather has helped ensure that we have healthy supply margins. And then finally, in terms of the short-term crisis-related interventions, we mentioned concern about windfall profits, so-called excess profits. So the UK government announced much earlier this year a levy on oil and gas producing companies back in May. And in fact, that the level of that levy was further increased a couple of weeks ago in the Chancellor's financial statement. Also in the Chancellor's statement in November, he announced a new electricity generator levy, which will cover nuclear and renewable generators that don't operate under a CFD. So that tends to be the earlier renewable projects built in this country. And the announcement from the Chancellor is that the levy will be a 45% tax on revenues where the power from those power stations has been sold over £75 a megawatt hour, and that will apply for 5 years, starting on the 1st of January. And clearly the government's intention is that the revenue it raises from the oil and gas profits levy and from the electricity generator levy will help to fund some of these very expensive costs of bill support that they've provided to customers that we were just talking about. So that rounds off the set of interventions that we certainly didn't know were coming this year in terms of the things we expected to be working on, things that I would say are the reactions to the crisis. And clearly some of them have the prospects of interacting in the longer term with the way that energy policy decisions are being made. But we also mustn't forget the longer term strategic priority of transitioning to a net zero economy. And what we did see much earlier this year, back in April, was a new energy security strategy. And that was, it does seem a while ago, it was 2 prime ministers ago. And Penny, I'm on the next slide, thank you. But it's really important, in the context of a conversation like this, where we're thinking about what's happened in the world of energy policy for across the whole year, that we actually do think about some of those more strategic steps. So actually, it does seem a long time ago, but the energy security strategy was a very important document for the future of energy in the UK. So amongst other things, and very importantly for EDF, the strategy set out a target for up to 24 gigawatts of nuclear by 2050. This was certainly the most ambitious target we've seen for nuclear, and the most explicit ambition stated for nuclear that we've seen for a considerable amount of time from the government. The document also talks about the establishment of Great British Nuclear. Now, we're still actually waiting to see exactly what form that will take, but overall, we can see a real sense that the government is intending and is striving for a revitalised nuclear industry in the UK. And very recently, in that autumn statement from the Chancellor, we also had the confirmed intention from the government to invest in and support Sizewell C, which is the second new large EPR project that EDF has been progressing. So pleased to see support now confirmed. Of course, the document didn't just cover nuclear. There were also very ambitious targets on offshore wind, a 50 gigawatts of offshore wind target by 2030, including 5 gigawatts of floating wind. And on the onshore wind side, a slightly contentious topic, we know there are differences of opinion amongst politicians, but onshore wind and solar will be back in CFD auctions, and new projects will be able to apply for those schemes in future. However, there are these differences of political levels of political support, and that does impact really getting planning permission and being able to progress the projects. And there are also challenges, as there are for all technologies, in getting grid connections and connecting to the network. So level of ambition positive, deliverability, it sort of remains to be seen. We also saw hydrogen covered in the same energy security strategy. So positively, we can see topics being joined up between generation and other forms of energy production, with a 10 gigawatt of low carbon hydrogen production target by 2030, which in itself is ambitious. So overall, across that strategy, it's very positive to see the level of ambition. The next step, and we may come back to this later in our conversation, the next step will be how to bring those strategies into investable frameworks and actually bring those projects to life. So relatively briefly, I'll just skip through some of the other strategic areas that remain important alongside dealing with the crisis. So we also talk a lot about the future energy system and the need for flexibility. And that, as I said earlier, is being trialled this year with the Demand Flexibility Service. I think that is widely expected to be the tip of the iceberg in terms of how we may be able to manage more flexibility and make sure we are actually taking a full system approach to optimizing how we supply and use energy in future. So this will continue to be, excuse me, this will continue to be a priority area for us, and we will be absolutely expecting to see some policy making developments in the next period, because overall the system costs in a scenario where you have high levels of flexibility are significantly lower overall for customers than a low flexibility scenario where everything is delivered in a traditional way with upstream production assets. There is certainly some challenges or some steps that need to be overcome in order to bring that flexible system into being. As one to mention before we move on, particularly for me, because it relates to other topics that are running at the same time, will be whether or not the market signals and prices are encouraging that kind of flexible behaviour. And at the moment, we have a system where a large part of our customer base, our domestic customers mainly, are not able to have access to the kind of price signals that they would need in order to know that it would be helpful and in order to receive incentives for being flexible with their demand. And that is something that will change over the next few years as we modernise the infrastructure, but will be very important to enable the flexibility that we need to see. The other topic to touch on is energy efficiency. Now, actually, even in the time that we have been preparing this presentation, the topic of energy efficiency has moved on further. We have been calling for some time for further focus on energy efficiency. Penny, I'm on the next slide. Thank you. Further attention on energy efficiency, and I think that's really because energy efficiency provides the opportunity for enduring savings for customers. It's not and in that respect, it's a much more sophisticated and valuable measure than a short-term temporary direct financial support towards energy bills for one winter or for half a year. So especially with the way that, particularly with the way that the prices have risen so much, clearly the investment case for energy efficiency is stronger than ever. And we were very pleased to see the Chancellor announce additional funding for energy efficiency and an energy efficiency task force, although we don't quite know what that will look like yet, and overall a target of 15% reduction in energy consumption by 2030. It remains the case that the sooner we can take action and support energy efficiency measures being fitted, the better. On the domestic side, EDF's been calling for an expansion of the existing energy company obligation scheme. There is now some more funding for that scheme, and just this week we saw a consultation from the government about how in practice that expansion of the eco scheme could look. So it's at consultation stage at the moment, but very positive. There's also existing funding for industrial energy transformation, and you can see some details on the slide there of the public sector decarbonisation scheme as well. This continues to be an area of priority, and the case for energy efficiency is stronger than it's ever been. So looking ahead to what 2023 might bring us, with the pinch of salt that I mentioned at the start, I guess the first question is, do we collectively envisage that market prices are going to settle back down? And inevitably there's a range of projections from different parties, and you can see on this slide the purple bar shows how BEIS, how government themselves, is currently thinking that baseload power prices might evolve in the coming few years. So they are expecting for a fall during 2023, but prices remain relatively elevated for several more years, actually. And of course, if you look to different forecasts, you'll see alternative views. The dotted line there is another industry forecast from Cornwall Energy, and you'll find as many variations as there are forecasters. Inevitably, how those prices evolve will heavily influence the way that policies are developed over the next few years. The reality is that if prices remain very high, it's not going to be feasible for government to completely step away from providing support for energy bills, although they will hope to have to do so to the same extent they are at the moment. So I've already mentioned that the non-domestic support scheme in its current form is under review, and we expect to be withdrawn for most customers, or certainly to change materially for most customers after the winter. That on the domestic side, we know already that the level of the bill for a typical customer will increase to £3,000 a year for 12 months from April 2023, and the longer term future of that is uncertain. We will continue to make the case for targeted support, additional support being given to customers who will need it, because it is obvious that there will continue to be very serious challenges with energy bill affordability, and certainly in the next year and probably beyond that too. A more longer term, the government had actually already started its review of the electricity market arrangements to determine whether or not they were going to be fit for future. And they'd started that review before the reality of the last 14 months had become clear. So there is already a project running to look at the longer term questions that you might have heard about in terms of whether or not we could somehow split electricity prices from gas prices, whether or not more locational charging signals would be appropriate and would certainly help drive the market for flexibility. That debate has already started in industry and with policymakers. It's going to be interesting to see how much the crisis and the response to the crisis itself impacts what the outcome of that review might be. So that some options being considered that would be very substantial changes to the market mechanisms, and the problem with that is that, or one problem with that is that these things may take a very long time to achieve. A full-scale market reform to introduce, for instance, zonal pricing, where you have different mini markets settling all over the country, that could take a number of years to design and implement and transition to. And it's not clear to me that actually the case for that kind of change has been well made, and that actually we can afford to wait that long for changes. So we think that there's quite a lot that can be achieved through reform of existing mechanisms, potentially building on some of the work that's been done through the energy crisis period, rather than large-scale reforms. But that debate's likely to be a key part of 2023. And of course, net zero remains a priority, and despite the focus on short-term actions, and I've talked about affordability and security of supply, decarbonisation reassuringly remains at the heart of the policy-making space, and actually, hopefully, it is becoming increasingly recognised that decarbonisation and net zero can in itself provide a large part of the solution to energy independence, energy security and energy affordability that we now all so clearly can see that we need. We are awaiting a review from MP Chris Skidmore looking at the economic case for net zero. I'm really hopeful and reasonably optimistic that his review will conclude that continuing to strive for net zero is evidently the right thing to do, if anything more so, a more strong case now than it was with energy prices at the lower levels that we had seen them historically. However, just moving on to the next slide, please, Penny. There are a lot of topics where we now have strategies and we need to actually continue to make progress towards delivery. So we've talked about some of them in these slides. There's a few more on this slide here. If we look across the topics, we've talked about the generation aspects. We haven't talked so much about electric vehicles, for instance, or decarbonisation of heat. These continue to be topics where we had hoped that 2022 would have been years of progress. In practice, for obvious reasons, that progress has been less less than we might have hoped. So we roll these expectations forwards and say that we hope very much that these things will be progressed during 2023. And so overall, just to finish, we hope, clearly there will continue to be a need to support customers and to react to whatever the current market price signals are, but we hope that we will be able to see a return to policy delivery in a broader sense, more strategic thinking, and less sort of crisis and short-term interventions. So there are a number of areas we've put here on the slide. So if we're all here again this time next year, this is the slide that we can put up and reflect on whether or not we saw the progress that we hoped to and expected to see in 2023. You can see planning reforms mentioned there, grid and network investments, decarbonisation of heat, and energy efficiency, which we've just been talking about. As part of that, there's a topic that has not been discussed much at all this year, which is the policy costs that currently mean that heating with electricity appears a much less attractive proposition than heating with gas, and action being needed there, which is something we've been talking about for a long time. More generally, in the retail market, there is a need to seriously look at the operation of the supply market. We all know that a large number of suppliers exited last year. Ofgem has been acting during this year to shore up the sector, but I would say that these interventions really need to bed in, and we need to see these actually see what the prospects are for a healthy, viable, sustainable sector in the longer term. Briefly mentioned electric vehicles and wider electrification of transport, and also progress on low carbon hydrogen and carbon capture. So that's our, I think that's our wish list for 2023. Don't hold us to it, but look forward to the opportunity to come back next year and see how far we have got with that list. So I think that's all I was going to say by way of our perspective on what has happened this year compared to what we might have expected and what we hope will happen in next year. But I very much look forward to questions now. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Thanks for a very insightful overview and look ahead of what's to come. So yeah, Roy's now going to join Rebecca and run through our Q&A. So thank you to those who pre-submitted questions. We've got those and we'll answer any that we can. And then I know Roy's been keeping an eye on the Q&A as they've been coming in throughout the webinar. But if you have any fresh questions now, please do feel free to keep asking them, and we'll spend the next 15 minutes answering as many as we can. So thank you, Rebecca. Roy, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks. Before you do, Penny, so I think the first couple of questions were just asking if we'll be sending over the recording and the slides to participants. I think we are. Is that right, Penny? Can you confirm that? Yeah, we shall send the recording out to everybody who registered after. So those who have joined us live, you can catch up again, and those who have opted to watch on demand can do the same. It'll also be up on our Talk Power events page on the website. Thanks very much. I think that was the first couple of questions. I see quite a few more have come in now just in the last few minutes as we've stopped. So we'll try and cover as many of these as we can. So the first one, Christian, do we have thoughts on how we can apply Eco Plus in blocks of leasehold flats that have multiple different EPC ratings? I'm sure, Christian, our Eco team probably do have thoughts on that, but I fear it's quite a detailed question, and I'm not sure Rebecca or I probably have enough of a knowledge of the latest Eco proposals to give you a good answer on that one. But do encourage you to take a look at the latest consultation on that. The next question is from Chris Barrett. Is there an indication that the crisis has triggered a change in consumer demand? Rebecca, something you can say on that one?
It's a really interesting question. Now I have to say I don't have the latest data to hand. when I last spoke to our demand forecasting team about this exact question a few weeks ago, there was, it's very challenging. It has been very challenging because the real step up in prices, particularly for domestic customers, took effect from the 1st of October. And as I mentioned, October and November were very mild months compared to seasonal normal. So I think the challenge of disaggregating the impact on customer demand of price changes and weather is a real mathematical puzzle for the analysts. I have not seen the results yet myself. Certainly, anecdotally, I'm sure we have all heard that consumers are turning on their heating later, that people are much more conscious of the energy they're using. Clearly, from an affordability perspective, there are customers who are in severe difficulty with the price of their energy, and they have no option but to be very, very sparing with their energy use. But I think what's been interesting for me is hearing that debate spread more widely across society and into other groups of customers who are certainly more overall of their energy demand. In terms of actual numbers, I think it will take a few more months to be able to properly disaggregate the varying impacts, because it is very difficult price at the same time, I'm afraid.
Okay, thank you. Chris also asked, is there a risk of partial or even full renationalisation of the market?
I guess that's more a conversation, a question to put to the government perhaps than us. I suppose my one perspective on it is that I don't know that that would don't know that it would change the reality of the situation that we're in, I suppose. So in order for could that happen because everybody exits the market at once? I think that's highly unlikely. I think there has been a good level of monitoring of the upstream and downstream markets this year. I think it's highly unlikely that you'd see it sort of forced by people handing back keys to power stations. But more generally, my purpose is that it wouldn't change the problems that we've got to solve. I'd be interested to put that question to government.
Okay, thank you. I've got lots of questions now. One from Barry. Great to see the wish list for 2023. Any thoughts on the wish list out to 2030 and beyond?
Oh, Roy, why don't you have a go?
Well, it's a very good question. I mean, it's in a sense, I think that they're one and the same thing, in that our wish list for 2023 is sort of taking lots of the steps that are needed in lots of areas to make things start to happen across all the sectors that we need to decarbonize, and to sort of start the progress, of the journey of implementing and growing markets for lower carbon transport, lower carbon heating, greater penetration of renewables and nuclear and so on. So I think in broad terms, our wish list for the longer term is that we keep heading down that path in a way that's sufficiently at pace to deliver the targets, very ambitious targets that we've got, to get us to a better place, both in terms of decarbonisation, but also more stable and secure energy prices for everyone. And I think we think that these are achievable things, but they do require very substantial continued progress and a lot of implementation across many different sectors. See, there's a question I'll also try from Jill Lee. With the increase in the numbers of EV cars, what is our take on its effect on energy availability? Yes, that's a great question. Obviously, I think one of the factors in this area is that although electric vehicle sales have been rising, they're now getting close to about 20% of the new car market. It still takes, because of the rate of turnover of the of the car fleet as a whole, I think there's more than 30 million cars in the UK. It will take a long time for electric vehicles to become a very large proportion of the total car fleet, probably, and it will be more towards the end of this decade and into the 2030s before electric vehicles are becoming the dominant presence. But yes, they will have absolutely an effect on demand. There's all sorts of estimates of exactly what that will be, but broadly speaking, if we look at the future and a fully electrified car fleet, we're looking at another 50 to 100 terawatt hours of demand, depending on the different kinds of vehicles and so on, and the rate of usage. And that's potentially on top of additional demand from the electrification of heat and from other decarbonisation activities. So all of that is a reason why we need to keep progressing in terms of the rollout of low carbon sources of power, and ensuring that we can match that demand, and upgrading networks to ensure that we can deliver it to people's homes. There's a question on EDFs. I think it's slightly hard to read this. I think it's on EDF's view on small modular reactors for nuclear. Do you want to have a go at that one, Rebecca?
I think, Roy, you could say as much as I could. So EDF in the UK, although we are best known for the fact that we're progressing now 2 new large EPR nuclear projects, we're actually very widely involved in broader uses and applications of nuclear generation technology in future, including generating hydrogen from nuclear, thinking about opportunities to use the heat produced in nuclear generation and other areas. So small modular reactors may be part of the picture for the future of nuclear generation in this country. It's not what we are progressing right at this second as EDF, but we're very aware. If you look at the 24 gigawatts of nuclear target that was in the energy security strategy, that's very likely to require a wide range of different types of nuclear technologies. That certainly is not all going to come from a single kind of nuclear production. So we're very supportive of SMRs progressing as we are with other nuclear technologies. Clearly, EDF around the world is also looking at small modular reactor technologies in other places. So as part of a big global group, we would hope that opportunities that for good technologies found elsewhere will be able to be used in this country too. Roy, do you want to add anything?
No, I think that was very clear, Rebecca. So there's a question here, and we've got more questions than we can answer now coming in. I think this is one that will be of interest to a lot of people. This is on future power prices. Is the new normal likely to be 100 to 150 pounds a megawatt hour rather than the 50 plus or minus 20 that we saw in the past? Will the Ukraine situation dictate that? And then they've said difficult to predict, I know. So I'll try and answer this one. I mean, yes, obviously always very hard to predict these things. And all sorts of analysts are attempting that difficult task as we speak and updating their projections. I think obviously a lot of factors go into this. The broad expectation for power prices for the rest of this decade is a return to something much closer to normal over the next few years, but at a somewhat higher level than before. gas prices are obviously the biggest single factor in that, and I think one of the factors that influences those projections is the global supply of gas, and there is prediction that a lot more new LNG facilities globally will come online over the next few years, and that hopefully will ease some of the pressure on global gas supplies, and thus create the potential for somewhat lower prices over the next few years. Obviously, what happens in Ukraine and with Russian gas supplies will still be a significant factor in that, as well as other things like demand from China and other parts of the world. So yeah, very hard to predict, but we are hopeful at least of a return gradually to something closer to normal, though it may be at a elevated level. Penny, we're at 11. What's the situation on timing? Do we need to stop now, or have we got time for any more questions?
I think we probably should start to wrap it up, but perhaps if you want to just do one or two more, and then we'll call it a close.
Just have a run through and see if I can pick out any of the other.
And what I will say is, obviously, we'll share our contact details. So if there have been any questions, I know there's a lot coming in, more than there's time to answer today.
So
then we
apologies for anyone who's raised a question which we haven't answered yet. We'll try and cover them. One on Sizewell C, and the question is, what is the main reason for the UK government to invest in the Sizewell C project instead of bringing in foreign investment? Rebecca, do you want to have a go at
that? Yes, thank you, Roy. So I suspect there are a number of different reasons. I don't know if I could accurately say what the main reason is. The overall objective for all of us is for the costs to customers of decarbonisation, the ultimate costs of the transition to be as low as possible. And given how much new investment is required, whether it's in generation capacity or network and grid capacity and reinforcement, there's a huge amount of capital that will be required across the transition overall. And one of the single best ways for the costs to overall be as low as possible is to make sure that the risk for those projects is as low as possible, and the cost of money, the cost of that capital is as low as possible. And the best way of achieving that is for the government themselves to be investing in the project. It's a simplistic sounding answer. The reality is that the government investing in Sizewell C will make the project overall less expensive than it would be if it were only invested in by private investors. And I would expect that that is the main motivation.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank
Penny.
you. Yeah, thank you so much, Rebecca and Roy, for joining us today and presenting on such a key and popular topic. And thank you to everybody for all your questions, and for joining us today live, and to those who catch up on demand. I guess all there is to do now really is just to remind you of how you can get in touch with us. So like I say, anything we didn't cover today, you can email us at letstalkpower@edfenergy.com. If you don't already, do follow us on our LinkedIn page, EDF Business Solutions, for regular updates, and anything else you need to know. There's a reminder of our website for large businesses. So thanks again, Rebecca and Roy, for joining us today. And I hope everybody has a great afternoon.
Thank you, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you.